All right, so I think I have a couple of technical talks, and I mean these are technical talks. So if you're more on the clinical side, then they may not interest you that much. But one is going to be on the VistA Docker images, and the other talk is I'm doing a mini talk on a fork of the M web server just for YataDB. It's called the YDB M web server. So I'm just going to work on these two, and they're going to be quick talks, and I'll take questions, and we'll go from there. So, so I'll just talk. This is going to be the outline. So this is where the code base lives, and I want to tell you it's not just YataDB specific. It builds Docker images for YataDB, GTM, and cache. It's the public Docker images are located in two places, mostly under World VistA, but there is a one that we make nightly at YataDB just for Octo and VistA. That's all packaged together, and also YataDB GUI actually is in there. I do have to mention this. It's people keep hitting this by mistake. It's never intended for a production use of VistA. There's a lot more for doing a production setup. One problem, for example, is you delete this Docker image, you lose all the data. It's simple. There's no backup built into it at all. No replication, nothing. It's only intended to as a quick demo and just to have a temporary place to do development. Its history, it's actually was created by also Christopher Edwards. Thank you, Christopher. He's laughing. Based on his, and it was based on a script he originally wrote for Vagrant back when Vagrant was became popular. Vagrant is a way to automatically provision virtual machines. But as the years have kind of moved on, we found out that it's easier to deploy Docker images. They're much smaller than to do entire VMs. And so we eventually came the focus of a lot of development on automation, and we've used it for many purposes. During Osera time, we used it to package up all the VistA on Fire work. It's also Osera time. Our Vivian, the work to produce Vivian used to be all manual, and it was like following lots of steps and doing them manually. It was quite difficult actually to do. Joe Snyder worked on putting that into this Docker VistA, so now it's automated. The other thing is that we actually use it a lot at YataDB for regression testing as changes to Octo against VistA. I'm currently the main maintainer. The repo has a long history now. It moved from KRM Associates, that's where Christopher started working on it, moved to Osera, then it moved back to Christopher's own account, and just this last year, a few months ago actually, we moved it to World VistA. So I mentioned its uses. It's used for demos. It's used for demo systems. Everybody knows. It has been used for development for multiple VA projects. I'm proud of that actually, because a lot of people have actually used it to work on VA code because it's difficult to get a VistA environment to develop on in the VA. Well, guess what? A lot of people actually use it. And even sometimes not directly on YataDB. I know somebody who uses the extracts and they load them into cache, and they do a VA work based on that. Obviously, for YataDB, we use it for testing. It's also used for input output, or you could call it kind of ETL kind of thing, extract, transform, load. Notably, Vivian is the most prominent input output work. And there's also another use, but I haven't done that for a little bit now. I stopped doing that, so it's okay. Just so that for people who know, like, some people may know that they've used this before. So what's new? Well, I went through the commits in the repository and looked at all the stuff that we did that's new. First thing is, I made this change during Osera time. You actually don't need the audit globals to run VistA, so I don't load them. So that kind of shrinks down the image by 1 GB. That helps. At this point, Octo, back when Octo was being first developed, we had like a separate script for installing Octo, and you had to always keep it updated because the Octo stuff kept getting updated. Well, now Octo is pretty much standardized and it always installs reliably. So now it's always installed as part of installing YataDB. I've added a way to put in a zip folder that you could download from GitHub so that you don't have to download it again. And this is mostly for me, so that when I'm testing, when I'm testing the scripts, I don't have to re-download everything from GitHub. I could just tell it to reload the file. We've added a way to build YataDB from source, so that basically means that you can build YataDB from source, and you would have master for building everything. You'd have the master branch of YataDB, and we use that in regression testing. I've added the YataDB GUI. The VistA SQL, while we had the VistA SQL in there loaded, we did not load the functions that are actually, and I think it was actually Chris Combs who gave us the functions. So, and they are functions to transform file mandates and whatnot. So we've loaded that now. One big problem the scripts had is that they never stopped on errors. So I was afraid of how much that's going to break, because that means that any statement that comes with a non-zero status. But we've had enough problems in our pipelines that this became necessary. So I finally used bash set -e. If you're keeping up with VistA, we've had a problem with Octo where this specific patch installs invalid sets of code fields. So I just auto fix it and tell people to fix it manually if they ever install it. CentOS 7 is long out of support. I've now finally moved it. Actually, this is within the last month or so, the last month or last 2 months. I moved the Docker image to Rocky Linux because YataDB just dropped CentOS RHEL 7 support as of, I think, June 1st or June 30th. It was something like that. And in the last few weeks, I added ARM64 support. So now we have an ARM64 image as well, so that you could run it on an Mac M1. So the notable public Docker images, there is one for VEHU that's updated monthly. It actually contains the actual latest VA FOIA source code. That's up to date. It contains Octo. It also contains the, I think just contains Octo. No, it contains Octo and the YataDB GUI as well. I believe it does. And there's a specific image that has the Fire interface that we built during Osera time. There is one that I created for Bhaskar 3 years ago. I've not really used it, but it's FOIA VistA with 1,000 synthetic patients from Cynthia. And there's one that's just called FOIA VistA, and that has not been updated since Osera closed. There's also one for RPMS, and that has not been updated since Osera closed as well. The one for World VistA EHR has the latest World VistA. The one that's the one hosted under YataDB is built nightly and has an ARM64 image. So I want to just thank the sponsors. A company called Apothesource actually sponsors the monthly update for VEHU. YataDB kind of sponsors the maintenance of the code base as part of our, we need to use this for our pipelines that validate Octo execution. And World VistA, I shouldn't say, they obviously host all the repositories, both on Docker Hub and on GitHub. And I have to say Nancy specifically, she creates Vivian every month from Foya using this code base. That's it. And let's see how I did on time. Yep, 12 minutes. That's a great record. Fantastic. Any questions?
Sam, you are known for being concise. I thought maybe you might be able to give the whole talk with one sentence.
Yeah, you seem to be very brief.
Yeah, now we got long enough for another whole lunch here. I didn't know you were
Yeah.
going to be so short. I would have
I mean,
scheduled
you're
you
like,
less.
well, 13 minutes into the hour.
This is a great presentation.
Good work.
I didn't mean to derail us.
Yeah,
Okay.
I guess
So
I could
since
fill
you
up that
talked about-
hour easily.
Since you talked about the fact that the Docker stuff used to use different technology, do you think that there's another technology that's coming up that Docker's taking over, that's taking over Docker, or do you think that we'll be safe thinking about Docker as a proven technology for the next few years?
Well, the best thing to say about anything in computing is nothing stays the same ever. So what's happening in the Docker ecosystem is two things. One is the container tools have been kind of standardized, and there have been a lot of various, I'm not gonna call them fork, I think they're all completely rewritten container runtimes. The most notable one is something called Podman, which is a Red Hat alternative to Docker. The other big thing that's happening in the container ecosystem is that Docker is kind of being sidelined, and it's not that important anymore because Kubernetes is all the rage. And it's basically, I have Christopher here. He's the expert. What do you think?
I would definitely, like Kubernetes, if you want to run Docker in production,
yeah,
or containers in production, Kubernetes is the way to do it.
Okay, did you guys hear that? Basically, Christopher says if you want to run Docker in production, Kubernetes is the way to do it.
But that's used how you deploy your containers, right?
Yep, that's correct.
Them?
It's how you deploy them. Yes.
So it's not really getting rid of Docker. Or am I misunderstanding?
No, it's just using it to install and then to start up the virtual machine.
Containers have got a very weird history. So I'll give kind of a brief overview. So like as Sam said, there's multiple runtimes and how you can run containers in general. Just a disclaimer, the way I talk about containers is I will always use the word container. I won't put Docker in front of it because Docker is a runtime, not the image itself. So the important thing here is that the standard for containers is called OCI, but that just basically gets you a standardized container that you can run on any OCI compliant runtime. Podman's an OCI compliant runtime. Containerd is a OCI compliant runtime. I think RunC is another one. So there's a whole bunch of container runtimes. If you're just doing local development, Docker or Rancher Desktop or something like that is a really useful tool for just running it locally. You can also run Kubernetes locally as well. But but moving on to like production workflows and really thinking about how do you run containers. And a production workflow, like there's not like everyone has barely moved to Kubernetes to run it. There was like OpenShift is another popular distribution of like can run Kubernetes like things that they did their own thing, but basically have moved to more the Kubernetes way of doing things. Yeah, so I mean that's kind of the short story, and like as Sam says, containers are also like much faster to start up, much lighter weight, that kind of thing.
So David Wixell has a comment. He says virtual machines and vagrants still have their place, as does Docker. We're a community focused on software from the 60s, 70s, and 80s. We should not fall for the idea that the newest, shiniest tool is useful. Thank you, David. We all fully agree.
It is about knowing the right tool in the toolbox. Not like you can't containerize absolutely everything. I did play with OS a long time ago that containerized everything from PID 1. So PID 1 was running Docker.
Wow.
And everything was a container, which was an interesting OS to use, but they kind of fallen away from that.
Yeah. Yep. And so
I'll let Sam go back to this
that's
presentation.
fine. No, it's
more questions.
So I wanted to ask you. So SUSE doesn't have Docker by default. What are they trying to push?
So SUSE owns a company called Rancher.
Yeah.
Rancher is a very big player in the Kubernetes ecosystem.
Yeah.
So that's probably what they're pushing is to use Rancher,
Okay.
and they've got their own ecosystem for that.
Okay.
I will say I happen to use a tool called RKE2 quite a bit in my day job.
Yeah. RKE.
RKE, Rancher Kubernetes Engine.
Okay.
That's more for the federal government side of running Kubernetes.
Yeah.
And it's an amazing distribution. Like if you're looking for a lightweight Kubernetes distribution that's really easy to use, really well thought out.
Yeah.
I would say go look at RKE2. It saves a ton of time.
Okay. Good.
But
okay. All right. So I will move on with the next. Any more questions, by the way, before we move on with the next presentation?
Oh, good. I'm glad you got another one.
Okay, good. This one is short.
I have
as well.
a question.
Go ahead, Arthur.
Yeah, could you go ahead and print out the reference, because on the speaker it's not coming out clearly what the other Kubernetes choices are.
Oh, the stuff that Christopher mentioned? Sure, I'll type them out.
Yes.
Give me 1 second.
There are something.
All right, thank you.
Yeah, couldn't understand them either.
Chris, the runtimes are, what did you say for runtimes? There's run C,
container D,
container D, I know, but Podman, and Docker. Okay. And then you mentioned, this one to David. I need to send it to everybody. Need to figure out.
You didn't do the RB one, did you? Type that out.
Just 1 second. I don't know where where do you change the to button in the chat? It doesn't. I don't see any.
Close the window and then.
Oh, down the bottom it says to everyone, and then there's a down arrow to the right of the everyone, so you can pick.
Well, I might have to stop sharing the screen. Oh, okay. It doesn't display it any when you're sharing. Okay. Okay, so here it is.
Nancy, does the chat actually get included when we do the recording, or we need to do something where we scroll through the chat?
Christopher is typing. I'm very humbled, His Highness.
No, the chat doesn't get included.
Those are the ones I know.
Is there a possibility of capturing the chat and publishing it?
Yeah, I think there is. I may have, sometimes it puts copies of chats on the local machine. I could look and see if it's there.
Nancy,
that would be
That's
great.
a really big help.
Nancy, at the top of the chat, you can download chat messages even.
All
in the
right.
menu.
Thank you, David.
My main concern is making sure that it's part of the recording.
No, I don't think it's going to be part of the recording. And
Alright.
I don't see where I can download it.
Yes,
somewhere.
go over to that and pull up the chat, and part of the chat is another square, or the 3 vertical periods there, and there you can download the chat messages.
Okay, good.
All right. Are we ready for the next one? Hello, do you guys hear
Yes.
me? Okay, good.
And I would encourage you to individually download the chat messages, because it's going to be, even if I've got it, it's probably going to be a mess.
Okay. So
Because it's going to be 8 hours worth of chats that aren't next to what you want it to be next to.
That's okay.
So this presentation is about the YataDB web server. It's a fork of the M web server. So I'll tell you why I needed to fork it. So we are using it in the YataDB GUI, and it has become obvious that we needed to add several backwards incompatible features. And those are, we wanted to do auto encoding and decode of JSON because it was becoming really old to actually do it for every single request. We wanted a completely no configure running mode. I mean, originally Christopher added that, but it was a parameter that you had to add. It became a bit. It's okay to use, but then the other problem is, what if you have another copy of the M web server and then you started by mistake on another port, which doesn't have that parameter, and you couldn't tell whether it's running with that parameter. The other feature I really wanted was standard output logging, which I finally just added, actually. It's really cool. And the other problem, obviously, is I work for YataDB. I cannot support cache anymore. So, and I'm pretty much the sole maintainer at this point of the original project. So one of the things I did then is I took all the lines that supported cache, and it only now supports GTM or YataDB.
So can I ask, and now that you've done that, I mean, for those of us that only use YataDB anyway,
so the original code base still stays. It's not changed. The original code base is still there. If you want cache support, you could still use the old code base.
But if the auto encoding and decoding of JSON, let's say you do something that is the way we usually do it, is that going to mess up what we do? So
as I said, it's a fork in a different namespace. It's not, you cannot go wrong here. It's in a different namespace. So if you're using the old code, it still stays the way that the old code works. There's no danger with the old code. You could still use the old code if you want.
No, and what I'm asking is, if you put the new code in an old instance, would it work?
Yes, it would. There is nothing. There's nothing wrong with it. It still runs. Yeah.
Okay.
Except that this.
Sam, maybe I can ask the question this way. We have RESTful web services using the M web server that request, for example, a CCDA and return an XML document.
Yep.
And does the change you're making in for encoding, would that interfere with the operation of that web service?
I haven't implemented the auto encoding decode yet, but how I will do it is I'll look at the MIME type, and if it is application/JSON, I will auto encode decode, and if it is something else, I won't touch it.
That'd be wonderful. Okay, thank you. So it's really not there's really nothing about it that's not backward compatible except for the caches.
Well, it is not backwards compatible because if I did this in the original code base, you are already gonna encode the JSON yourself again.
Ah, yeah, you're right.
There's a way to like do some gymnastics behind that to like set a variable or look at the data in advance. I can do that, but in the end, like combined with everything, and the fact is I need to make it work on cache as well. It doesn't make it really feasible for me to be able to support it anymore.
Makes sense.
Sam, the original MWeb server that you forked from the VA was created, I believe, by Kevin Meldrum, and he was doing things.
That's the next slide.
Okay, and that the code he had was using a dollar text table, so he was not depending on FileMan or any of the kernel utilities.
Yeah, we've gone back to that. It's now back again to use a dollar text table, and it does not know. It actually, the current code does not touch a single global, so it actually runs in YataDB without any global. So you don't even have to create a database. Okay, so as David mentioned, it was created by Kevin Meldrum. I forked it to make a generalized REST server that operates based on the configuration files in VistA. And these were the heady days where, you know, we were all trying to get a piece of the VistA web services pie. Well, and the VA actually never adopted the code, and which is very common actually. And there's still today no way to get a web service from VistA in the VA, which is really sad. But for what's it worth, the MWeb server was used in the VA PALS project, and and it's been used and still being used there. And at some point, you know, Christopher was doing a prototype YataDB GUI, and he made a configurationless mode for the GDE GUI, and it's now forked to YataDB web server. So some of the features that have been already implemented, there's std out logging, and which is exactly, I copied the implemented what get printed out from Python 3 HTTP server. CI pipelines, finally Control C to stop the server. I really wanted that. It's no globals are used by default. It's now rename spaced, and I've had people use this from Denmark. They're using the MWeb server in Denmark. They sent in a couple of bugs for UTF-8. Oh, thank you. Oh, David Wixel has a good point. I'll go back to the chat and mention something. I made a couple of UTF-8 fixes, and they're gzipping some binary files, added a control CR at the end, which there was a bug in binary files, so I fixed it. All right, let me address the comments. So, is there a FileMan JSON encode decode capability? I am sure there is, and I'm trying to think if it's part of this code base or somebody else. I think Connor wrote something that's independent, that's actually more specific for FileMan. This will also encode FileMan data, and it will do it properly as well. But Connor wrote something, Connor Dowling. Yes, thank you for the link. And MWeb server actually is one of the fastest ones on the list. I remember that. Although we found out that having a server in Lua and a server in Rust is even faster, which is we don't understand. We don't understand how exactly. I haven't figured out how come Lua and Rust are faster. Okay, one part one part of the history you left out is Christopher and David worked on it as part of the JDS and the EHMP project. So it happened in between the original VPR fork and the initial fork, and Sam, that's I think it happened after, but what I have done is I've taken some of the fixes that were done to the JSON parser that were found in that were fixed in JDS, and I took that in. But as far as the web server code itself, that has pretty much stayed from the original stuff that Kevin gave me. But thank you, David, for reminding me, and I knew that obviously, but I forgot to put it in the slides.
So could you give me a 2-sentence thing about what a CI pipeline is?
Okay. As today the what a lot of people do to release software. It used to not be possible in earlier days, but now we have we have cloud servers, and what people tend to do is they write, it came out of the movement to write unit test suites to test that all your software all works. So a CI pipeline is essentially, you run all the tests on a cloud server before your code gets merged, and if the tests fail, your code doesn't get merged, and if it passes, your code gets merged. And it's essentially part of Git commits. So you do a Git commit, and it runs a CI pipeline on it, and then you either get a failure or a success.
CI stands for continuous integration, Nancy.
Yep, that's correct. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
And CI is usually combined with CD, which is continuous delivery. That means that the code is ready at the point that once it passes the CI test, it gets committed, and there are some other processes that take place that say, like for at least, let's say, big companies, like let's take example Netflix. So they make a change in the code base, it passes the CI pipeline. It goes in a staging area where there's some human who have to review it, but then they click on a button, it gets deployed automatically. That would be called continuous delivery.
Okay. Thank you.
I'm trying to move it. Doesn't want to move. Okay. Okay. So one of these already got done actually. So, or two of them. So the new features we're planning to add are auto encode decode JSON on the web server, and that I talked a little bit about that. We implement file caching mechanisms. I already finished implementing that. That's now we wrote a function called zy hash, which does a murmur 128 hash. It's pretty fast. It's fast enough for what we use the web server for. I don't know if you're downloading like a video file, that might kill it, but I'll worry about that if I ever have to implement this with video files. There's a thought to implement chunked data streaming. So there is that part of the HTTP standard lets you do something called chunk data encoding or chunk transfer encoding. So you could just send a piece of data. You just say, guess what? I'm not sending you the entire data, but I am going to send you this much now. And then so the client is always waiting for more data. We've been thinking about implementing that for streaming globals out of YataDB. The other thing was there were some original design decisions in the original code base. One of them was the fact that get and post where you called the routines with different parameters. And I just Christopher is breathing a sigh of relief. I can't believe this. Oh my god! So that turned out to be a lot of pain for users, and so I'm right in the moment, like removed all of that, and I basically at this point you just use variables in the local symbol table that I will define in the documentation to just set the data get the data you need and set the data you're sending back. Because people found this to be very painful to use, having to have different signatures for different calls. So that's it. That's all. So, and as far as like, do I expect anybody else besides YataDB to use this? Not really right now, but if because the advantage with the original MWeb server project is that it's made to run on several different operating systems. I even had code in there for MV1 at some point, and people have actually used it to prototype an application in one of the M implementations and moved it to others. And no, not just YataDB to cache. I've had the opposite happen, cache to YataDB as well. So uh, there's that it has been actually useful in that. So, but I wanted to give this presentation just to tell the people who are kind of interested in this that there's another fork out there, and I'm really gonna dial back on maintaining the original code base. So that's that. Questions, and we have 7 minutes left. And David is reminding me that it's Mumps V1 is now RSM, and it's not a fork, it's a brand new name. Thank you. That's correct. Thank you very much. Bhaskar has
do you
Sorry, go
anticipate
ahead.
do you anticipate many of the changes that you've made that were not removing cache code to become useful in the M server that includes that code? And will that?
I agree they would be very useful, but I cannot make them because I cannot test on cache. So if anybody is very welcome to take those changes and apply them on the original code base, but I can't do it because I have to test on cache to make sure that they work. Is Raphael okay? Bhaskar answered, so there you go. That's the answer. So there you are. Any other questions?
For the sake of the recording, could you ask the question that Raphael asked and give the answer?
Okay, is the YataDB GUI using the YDB web server? The short answer is yes, but the long answer is not today, but in the next couple of weeks probably, because I'm working on the code base and I'm kind of finishing it up, and we need to switch our code to use that. Are there any other examples of end user web applications? So VA Pals, Raphael, is written using the MWeb server completely from top to bottom. So you should take a look if you haven't.
There was also M2Web, and also they used a web server in front of Octo Barnett's model at Beth Israel and Deaconess Hospitals in Boston.
Do you know if any of those are actually being used inside the VA, Chris?
No. M2Web was basically their massage of VA VistA. But aside from that, no.
Oh, VA PALS is in the VA cloud. It is received. We received a authority to operate an ATO, and it's in production at 2 VA sites, and it uses the AMWeb server, and I think it uses a version of the VA of the M server that's been ported to match, so it's in a percent routine, and a lot of edits, changes, and enhancements. So, I don't know about enhancements, bug fixes. So what else?
Oh, that's encouraging.
Yeah, it's good. The big deal for the authority, the last thing that had to be done before we got the authority to operate in the cloud, in the VA cloud, was we needed to do single sign-on. We needed to be able to use the cloud services, the VA's cloud services that do single sign-on. So when you log in. When you log into VA PALS, it uses your PIV card. It doesn't require you to enter, except for the first time you do. You don't have to enter a login ID or a password anymore if you have your PIV card authenticated. If you're in a session with the cloud, and that was kind of cool. So we got that running.
Very definitely.
All right, everybody, thank you for attending. And I think I am done with all the lectures I was supposed to do today and at this conference. So you're never going to have to hear from me again.
Thank you, Sam. Love to hear from you.
Oh, thank you, Kevin.
We'd love to have you sit in and listen to the other conferences, though. But I know that you like nature.
Thank you, Sam, for your great work.
Oh, no problem. Thank you.
Great work, Sam. Okay. Well,
referring to the chat, David Wixell mentioned that there was a small web server built into Mumps VM for V1 for years, and since RSM is just a renaming, it's also a part of RSM.
Okay. So let me see if I can get configured.
I only mentioned that because Chris and others were talking about M2Web and all that kind of stuff. You guys were kind of going into the history of all that stuff, and the MV1 web server was probably initially developed around the same time as M2Web and WebLink Developer and EWD and all that stuff. Just another one that was
unidentified caller has arrived.
Thank you, David. I appreciate you mentioning that for the recording.